watching! The whole world's watching! The whole world's watching! The whole world's watching! The whole world's watching!
But police in Sydney didn't seem to care who was watching. They were determined to contain the second protest in as many weeks in support of Wikileaks and its frontman, Julian Assange, who Australians are saying has been abandoned by his government.
The Australian government must support an Australian citizen, Julian Assange. It's not that complicated.
The Foreign Minister has spoken out on behalf of Assange, but the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, has raised the ire of many Australians, including Julian Assange's mother, after coming out in condemnation of the transparency activist, describing his actions as illegal. The whole incident has reminded many of how Australia was happy to forget the rights of its citizens when they were swept up in the US war on terror, tortured and held for years.
Basically two reasons we're here. One, to support Wikileaks for releasing information in the public interest, whether it's about Australia, about governments, about the US, whatever it may be. We have a right as a public to know this sort of information. Secondly, is to defend Julian Assange and demand the Australian government, who has been so clearly out to get him. Julia Gillard last week said that his actions were illegal. There's no evidence for that. Every legal aspect says that's not true at all. She's either preemptively buckling to US pressure or presuming they want the US to do something about Assange as an Australian citizen.
Can you tell us very quickly about the history of Australian citizens and US treatment of them and the Australian government's complicity in that?
It's not good, is the simple answer. In the last 10 years we've seen two citizens, particularly David Hicks and Mamdouh Habib, both Australian citizens during the Howard era, who were essentially given away to the US, essentially. David Hicks was in Guantanamo, I think, for 5 years. Mamdouh was basically tortured in Egypt and then returned about 5 years ago now. And the fear is that during the Howard era, the previous administration, there was essentially a sense that Australian citizens were less important than keeping America happy. I mean, Julian Assange, who arguably is far more important in the scheme of things than those two, without minimising those two individuals' terrible cases, what Assange is really trying to do, arguably more than anyone else in my lifetime, is actually to strike at the heart of what US empire actually means. What does it mean? How does it work? Who exactly benefits from it? And that's why, of course, many in the powers that be are upset with that, including in the mainstream press. So we demand in the rally today, just in general, that Assange as an Australian citizen is not treated as David Hicks and Mamdouh Habib were so badly years ago. Assange himself released a statement today, and let me read it for you. It's very, very short. My convictions are unfaltering. I remain true to the ideals I have always expressed. These circumstances of him being in jail shall not shake them. If anything, this process has increased my determination that they are true and correct. We now know that Visa, MasterCard and PayPal are instruments of US foreign policy. It's not something we knew before. And I'm calling on the world to protect my work and my people from these illegal and immoral acts.
There's a whole list of American politicians who've lined up to say that Assange should be hunted down like Osama bin Laden, he should be treated as a terrorist, or even, according to the Canadian Member of Parliament, who's an advisor no less than to the Canadian Prime Minister, that Assange should be killed. Now, every member of the cabinet, of the government of this country, and every member of the shadow cabinet has had an opportunity to find the courage to say, we don't tolerate those homicidal attitudes coming from America. But unfortunately, they haven't had the guts to say that.
I'm not going to comment on the rights and wrongs of the charges or the allegations in Sweden against Assange, because the reality is, in the midst of all the media spin, we don't know. But this rally is about the right to a fair trial, free from outside influence. The UK Independent has reported that Sweden and the US have been involved in secret negotiations to extradite Assange to the United States, where
With more protests planned and no end to the legal dramas engulfing Assange in sight, it seems the Australian government will have to decide what matters more, the wishes of its people or of its superpower patron.